night the desert swallowed another soul. The sky was so black it felt like the world had ended. No moon, no stars, just the endless stretch of Highway 90 cutting through the emptiness of West Texas. I was parked on the shoulder, engine idling, radio hissing with static, watching the taillights of a single pickup truck fade into the void. Out here, you learn to recognize the signs, the way the wind dies, the way the coyotes go silent, the way the darkness presses in like a living thing. I'd been a Texas state trooper for 12 years, long enough to know that most nights are just boredom and paperwork. But every so often, the desert reminds you who's really in charge. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. A woman's voice, trembling, said her husband hadn't come home. He'd left the bar in Marfa an hour before, sober, headed west. I checked the clock, checked the map, and felt that old, familiar chill. New moon. I radioed dispatch, told them I checked the stretch between Valentine and Van Horn. I'd done this before, too many times. The road was empty. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under my tires. I found the truck a few miles past the county line. Driver's door open, engine running, headlights pointed into the brush. No sign of the man. No footprints, no blood. Just the faint smell of something burned and the sense that I was being watched. I called it in, but I already knew how it would go. Another disappearance, another file, another family left with questions no one would answer. Every new moon, someone disappears. No one talks about why. The next morning, I sat in the cramped office of the Presidio County Sheriff, the stale scent of burnt coffee and dust hanging in the air. Sheriff Morales slid a thin manila folder across the desk, her eyes tired and wary. "That's the third one this year," she said, voice low. "Same stretch of road, same kind of night." I flipped through the file, missing person report, a photo of a smiling man in a ball cap, a wife's handwritten statement. The details were always the same. Last seen driving home after midnight, new moon, vanished without a trace. Morales leaned back, arms crossed. "You know what folks around here say, right?" I shrugged, feigning indifference. "People talk. Coyotes, cartels. Maybe someone just wanted to disappear." She shook her head. "It's not that simple. You've been here long enough to know the difference." I didn't answer. I'd heard the stories, the whispered warnings at the diner, the way people locked their doors and drew their curtains tight when the calendar turned black. But I was a trooper, trained to look for evidence, not legends. After the briefing, I stopped by the only gas station in Valentine. The old man behind the counter eyed me as I poured burnt coffee into a paper cup. "You working that case?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. He glanced at the calendar taped to the wall. The new moon circled in red. "You be careful, trooper. There's rules out here. Not the kind you write down." I tried to press him, but he just shook his head and busied himself with the register. Back at the station, Deputy Ruiz caught me in the hallway. He was young, local, and superstitious. "You're not planning to go out there tonight, are you?" he asked, eyes wide. "Not on the new moon." I forced a laugh. "You believe all that?" He didn't smile. "Doesn't matter what I believe. Just don't go out after dark. Not alone." I left the station with the file under my arm, the warnings echoing in my mind. I told myself it was just small-town paranoia, old stories clinging to empty land. But as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the desert, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something everyone else already knew. I told myself I was just doing my job, that I wasn't the type to let ghost stories dictate my patrol route. The sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, then dropped away, leaving the desert in a darkness so complete it felt like the world had been erased. I drove west, headlights cutting a narrow path through the black, the new moon hanging somewhere above, invisible and heavy. The stretch between Valentine and Van Horn was always lonely, but tonight it felt different. The radio, usually a comfort, was nothing but static and garbled voices. I tried to call in my location, but the signal faded, replaced by a low, pulsing hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I turned the dial, but every channel was the same, static, then silence, then a faint, distant whistling that made the hairs on my neck stand up. A mile marker flashed by, then another. I slowed as I approached the spot where the last disappearance had happened. The air felt colder, the darkness thicker. That's when I saw it. A flicker of light in the brush, pale and quick, like someone waving a lantern just out of reach. I pulled over, engine idling, and stepped out into the night. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my boots. I scanned the roadside with my flashlight, the beam trembling in my hand. For a moment I thought I saw movement, a shadow darting between the mesquite, too tall and thin to be a coyote, too fast to be a man. I called out, voice echoing in the emptiness, but there was no answer, just the wind, rising and falling, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and something older, something metallic. I found a set of tire tracks leading off the road, fresh in the dust. I knelt to take a photo, but when I looked at the screen, the image was blurred, the tracks already fading as if the desert was swallowing them whole. I tried again, but the camera glitched, the battery suddenly dead. I reached for my notebook, but the pen wouldn't write, the ink refusing to flow. A cold sweat broke out across my back. I stood, scanning the horizon, and saw the lights again, this time farther away, moving in a slow, deliberate circle. I wanted to chase them, to prove to myself that there was a rational explanation, but my feet wouldn't move. The darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating, and for a moment I felt utterly alone, cut off from the world I thought I understood. I forced myself back to the cruiser, locked the doors, and sat in the silence, heart pounding. The radio crackled to life for a split second, just enough for me to hear a voice, distant and distorted, whisper my name. Then nothing. I drove back to town with the windows up, headlights on high, every nerve on edge. When I checked the dash cam footage later, the screen was black, the timestamp frozen at 11:59 p.m. No evidence, no proof, just a lingering sense of dread and the memory of those impossible lights. What did I just see? And why did it feel like the desert was warning me to stop looking? The next morning, I stopped by the old feed store on the edge of town, hoping for answers. The place was empty except for Earl McKinney, a rancher whose family had worked this land since before the highway was paved. Earl was a fixture in Valentine, weathered, silent, and known for keeping to himself. He watched me from behind the counter, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his battered hat. "You were out on 90 last night," he said, not asking. "On the new moon." I nodded, trying to sound casual. Just doing my rounds. I saw some strange things. Thought maybe you'd know something about it." Earl didn't answer right away. He poured 2 cups of black coffee, slid one across to me, and sat down. "There's rules out here, trooper. Not the kind you learn at the academy. The kind you learn if you want to see another sunrise." I waited, letting the silence stretch. Finally, he spoke, voice low and steady. "First rule: don't drive on the highway after midnight on the new moon. That's when the road belongs to them. Second, if you see lights in the brush, don't follow. They're not lanterns and they're not lost hikers. Third, if you hear your name on the wind, don't answer. It's never who you think it is. Fourth, never leave your vehicle running and the door open. That's an invitation. Fifth, if you find tracks that vanish, don't try to photograph them. The desert erases what it wants to keep." He looked at me, eyes hard. "Every disappearance out here, someone broke a rule. My cousin followed the lights in '82. Never found him. The sheriff's boy left his truck running in '97. Gone before they finished their coffee. You break the rules, you're marked." A chill ran through me as I replayed the night before. I'd driven after midnight, followed the lights, tried to photograph the tracks, and left my cruiser running with the door open. I'd broken nearly every rule without even knowing it. Earl leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "You're not from here, so I'll tell you straight. The desert keeps its own tally. If you break the rules, it remembers, and it doesn't give second chances." I left the feed store with the rules echoing in my mind, the weight of every broken one pressing down on me. For the first time, I wondered if the disappearances weren't just bad luck or bad people, but something older, something watching, waiting for someone to slip. If you break the rules, you're marked, and I was already on the list. I spent the next week buried in paperwork and dust, chasing leads that seemed to evaporate the moment I got close. The victims were locals and travelers, men and women, young and old. The only thing they had in common was being alone on the road when the darkness was deepest. I started interviewing families, hoping for something the files had missed. Most were reluctant, eyes darting to the floor, voices tight with grief and something like fear. Mrs. Gutierrez, whose son vanished 3 years ago, clutched a rosary as she spoke. "He called me from the road, said he saw lights in the desert. I told him not to stop, not to look. He laughed, said I was superstitious. That was the last time I heard his voice." She wouldn't say more, just pressed the rosary into my hand and told me to pray for him. At the diner, I found Deputy Ruiz nursing a cup of coffee, eyes red from lack of sleep. "You ever notice how the coyotes go quiet on the new moon?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Last night, I saw a jackrabbit just standing in the middle of the road, not moving, not scared, like it was waiting for something. I tried to laugh it off, but the memory of the silent desert pressed in on me. The more I dug, the stranger things became. My radio, usually reliable, started cutting out at odd times, replaced by bursts of static or, once, a woman's voice singing in a language I didn't recognize. My watch would skip ahead or fall behind, minutes lost or gained with no explanation. I'd drive a familiar stretch of road and find myself miles from where I thought I was, headlights illuminating landmarks that shouldn't have been there. One night, I found a dead coyote on the shoulder, eyes wide open, body twisted in a way that made my stomach turn. There were no wounds, no blood, just a circle of scorched earth around it. I took photos, but when I checked my phone later, the images were gone, replaced by black squares. The next morning, the body had vanished, the ground smooth as if nothing had ever happened. I started to hear stories about a tragedy no one wanted to discuss. In the 1950s, a bus carrying migrant workers crashed on that same stretch of Highway 90 during a new moon. The official report blamed a blown tire, but locals whispered about lights in the road, about the driver swerving to avoid something that wasn't there. 23 people died, their bodies buried in a mass grave near the old mission. Some said the land was cursed, that the dead were restless, that every new moon they came looking for company. I tracked down Father O'Malley, the priest at the mission, hoping for answers. He was old, his hands shaking as he poured tea. There are things out here older than the church, older than the highway, he said, eyes distant. The land remembers. The people who died that night, they weren't the first, and they won't be the last. Every new moon, the boundary thins. The rules are there for a reason. I tried to reconcile what I was hearing with what I knew. I was trained to look for patterns, for motives, for suspects. But every time I thought I had a lead, it slipped away, replaced by another story, another warning. The tension between my badge and the weight of local tradition grew heavier with each passing day. The sheriff wanted answers, the families wanted closure, but the desert seemed determined to keep its secrets. One evening, as I drove down the highway at dusk, I saw a figure standing by the side of the road, a woman in a white dress, hair blowing in the wind. I slowed, rolled down the window, called out. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me with eyes that seemed to glow in the fading light. I blinked, and she was gone, the road empty except for the sound of my own breathing. Back at the station, I pinned a map to the wall, marking every disappearance, every sighting, every strange event. The pattern formed a rough circle, centered on the site of the old bus crash. I stared at it for a long time, the weight of realization settling in. The disappearances weren't random. They were part of something older, something that followed rules I was only beginning to understand. The more I investigated, the more the line between reality and legend blurred. Radios failed, time slipped, animals acted as if they saw things I couldn't. The desert was alive, watching, waiting for the next new moon, and I was running out of time to figure out what it wanted. It was just after midnight when my phone rang, the screen lighting up with my sister's name. She never called this late. Her voice was tight, barely controlled. "Danny, have you seen Eli?" My nephew, 16, stubborn and restless, had borrowed her truck to visit a friend in Marfa. He hadn't come home. The last she heard, he was headed back, alone, across the same stretch of Highway 90 that had swallowed so many before him. My heart dropped. I told her to stay put, that I'd find him, but as I hung up, my hands shook. Driving out into the night, the landscape felt different, hostile, expectant. Every mile marker was a reminder of someone lost. I remembered being Eli's age, riding in the back of my father's pickup, the two of us chasing jackrabbits across the flats, my dad telling stories about the land. He'd always said the desert had a memory, that it kept track of every promise and every mistake. I'd laughed then, certain the world was simple, that everything could be explained if you looked hard enough. But as I sped down the empty highway, I couldn't shake the memory of my father's funeral, the way the wind howled through the cemetery, the way the sky seemed to press down on us. I'd left for the academy soon after, determined to escape the weight of old stories and old fears. Now, years later, I was back, chasing shadows and praying I wasn't too late. I found my sister's truck abandoned on the shoulder, headlights still on, driver's door open. My chest tightened. I called Eli's name, my voice swallowed by the wind. No answer, just the echo of my own fear. I searched the roadside, found nothing but a set of footprints leading into the brush, vanishing after a few yards. Standing there, I felt the rules pressing in on me, the warnings I'd ignored, the lines I'd crossed. Duty told me to keep searching, to call for backup, to trust the process. But something deeper, older, whispered that I was out of my depth, that the land was keeping score. For the first time, I wondered if belief was a kind of survival, if the rules were more than superstition. I was torn between the badge and the blood, between skepticism and the growing certainty that something in the desert was watching, waiting, and that I'd already given it a reason to notice me. The new moon came again, blacker than pitch, the desert swallowing every trace of light. I'd spent the days since Eli vanished combing the brush, questioning every ranch hand and drifter, but the land gave nothing back. No sign, no sound, just the endless hush of the West Texas night. I knew what the rules said. Don't drive the highway after midnight. Don't answer voices in the wind. Don't leave your vehicle running and the door open. But desperation has a way of making you reckless. If the thing out there wanted me marked, I'd give it every reason to show itself. I parked my cruiser at mile marker 212, the spot where the circle on my map closed tightest. Midnight ticked over. I left the engine running, the door wide open, and stepped out into the cold. The silence was absolute, the kind that makes your ears ring. I called Eli's name, my voice trembling, daring whatever was out there to answer. First, nothing. Then, a flicker of movement in the mesquite, a pale light weaving through the brush. I felt the urge to follow, every instinct screaming that this was the moment the rules warned about. I forced myself forward, boots crunching on gravel, flashlight beam shaking. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker, until it felt like I was wading through water. The light stopped ahead, hovering just above the ground. I stepped closer, heart pounding, and saw a figure standing in the shadows, a woman in white, her face hidden by a curtain of hair. She lifted her head, and her eyes glowed with a cold, inhuman light. When she spoke, her voice was layered, echoing with the voices of every missing soul. "You broke the rules," she whispered. "You called, so I came." I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry, my tongue heavy. She drifted closer, her feet not touching the ground, the air around her shimmering with heat and cold at once. Behind her, shapes moved, tall, thin shadows with too many joints, faces blurred and shifting. I realized, with a jolt of terror, that they were watching me, waiting to see what I would do. I forced myself to remember why I was here. "Where's my nephew?" I demanded, voice cracking. "What do you want?" The woman smiled, a slow, terrible thing. "The desert keeps what it's owed. Every new moon, a debt is paid. You broke the rules, so you're marked. But you came willingly. That changes things. The shadows pressed closer, the air thick with the scent of burning sage and something metallic. My flashlight flickered, then died. I was alone in the dark, surrounded by things that shouldn't exist. I felt a hand, cold, impossibly strong, close around my wrist. Images flashed through my mind. The bus crash, the lost travelers, Eli's face pale with fear. I understood suddenly that the land wasn't just haunted, it was hungry, and the rules were the only thing keeping it at bay. I closed my eyes, fighting panic, and remembered Earl's words. If you see it, it sees you. I opened my eyes, met the woman's gaze, and refused to look away. Take me, I said. Let him go. The wind howled, the shadows shrieked, and for a moment I thought I'd be torn apart. But then, just as suddenly, the grip loosened. The woman's face softened, her eyes dimming. Betrayed, she whispered. A choice. The desert remembers. The lights vanished. The shadows melted into the night. I was alone again, the silence broken only by my own ragged breathing. In the distance, I heard a voice, Eli's voice, calling for help. I ran toward it, heart pounding, not daring to look back. I'd broken the rules, faced the thing that waited in the dark, and survived. But I knew, as I stumbled through the brush, that nothing in the desert ever came without a price. If you see it, it sees you, and now it knows my name. I crashed through the brush, lungs burning, Eli's voice echoing in the darkness. The desert seemed to shift around me, every step taking me deeper into a place that felt both familiar and utterly wrong. The moonless sky pressed down, the air thick with the scent of dust and old secrets. I called Eli's name again, desperate, and this time I heard him closer but muffled, as if the land itself was trying to swallow his cries. I stumbled into a clearing, heart hammering. There he was, kneeling in the dirt, eyes wide with terror, arms wrapped around himself. He looked up as I approached, but his gaze slid past me, fixed on something behind my shoulder. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my gut. The woman in white stood at the edge of the clearing, her form flickering like a mirage. The shadows gathered behind her, shifting and restless. She raised a hand, and the world seemed to tilt. My vision blurred, the ground rippling beneath my feet. I remembered the rules. Don't answer voices. Don't leave your vehicle. Don't follow the lights. I'd broken them all, and now I was face to face with the consequence. I reached for Eli, but the woman's voice stopped me cold. You came for him. You broke the rules for him. What will you give to take him back? My training screamed at me to negotiate, to reason, to find leverage. But the academy hadn't prepared me for this. I forced myself to stand tall, to meet her gaze. Take me instead. Let him go. She tilted her head, considering. A trade. Blood for blood. But the desert is greedy. It always wants more. The shadows pressed closer, their forms resolving into faces I recognized. People from the files, the missing, their eyes hollow and pleading. I felt their despair, their longing to go home. The woman stepped forward, her eyes boring into mine. You can save him. You can save them all. But you must choose. Follow the rules and you walk away alone. Break them and you risk everything. I hesitated, torn between the logic drilled into me by years of police work and the primal fear that told me the rules were the only thing keeping us safe. Eli whimpered, reaching for me. I thought of my father, of the stories he'd told, of the warnings I'd ignored. I thought of every family I'd failed to help, every name on my map. I took a breath, steadying myself. What do you want? The woman smiled, and the clearing grew colder. A memory, promise, something you can't get back. I understood then. The desert didn't want bodies, it wanted stories, legacies, the things that tied us to the land. I closed my eyes, searching for something I could give. My badge felt heavy in my pocket, a symbol of everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed. I pulled it out, holding it up. Take this. Take my name, my place here. Let Eli go. Let the others go. The woman reached out, her fingers brushing the badge. The metal burned cold, and I felt a piece of myself slip away. A lifetime of memories, the pride of service, the certainty of who I was. The shadows recoiled, their forms flickering, and I heard voices, dozens, hundreds, whispering thanks, fading into the night. Eli collapsed into my arms, sobbing. The woman stepped back, her eyes softer now. The debt is paid. For now. The clearing brightened, the darkness receding. I looked around, searching for the others, but they were gone. Set free or claimed by the desert, I couldn't say. The woman faded, her form dissolving into mist. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and sage. I helped Eli to his feet, guiding him back through the brush. The world felt different, lighter, but I knew the cost. My badge was gone, my name a whisper on the wind. I'd bargained with something older than the land, and I'd survived. But I was no longer the man who'd started down that highway. As we reached the road, the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. Eli clung to me, shaking, but alive. I looked back once, half expecting to see the woman watching, but the desert was empty, silent except for the distant call of a coyote. I'd broken the rules, trusted my heart over my training, and paid the price. The fate of the missing was sealed. Some returned, some lost forever. My own survival was a question I'd carry with me, a debt that might never be fully repaid. But for now, I had my nephew, and the desert had my name. The sun rose slow and red over the desert, painting the world in colors that felt almost unreal. I drove Eli home in silence, the weight of the night pressing on both of us. He stared out the window, eyes hollow, hands trembling in his lap. When we reached my sister's house, she ran out and pulled him into her arms, sobbing with relief. I stood back, watching, feeling both present and impossibly far away. Word spread quickly. Some in town called it a miracle that Eli had been found alive, wandering the edge of the highway at dawn. Others whispered about the price, about the things I'd seen and the badge I no longer wore. Sheriff Morales met me outside the station, her face a careful mask. "You did what you had to do," she said quietly. "But you look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed. Ghosts would have been easier to explain. Families of the missing came to me, some with hope, some with anger. A few loved ones returned, dazed and changed, unable to remember where they'd been. Most were never found. The desert kept its secrets, and the rules remained unspoken but ironclad. The old-timers nodded at me with new respect, but others kept their distance. as if I'd brought something back with me that didn't belong. I tried to write my report, but the words wouldn't come. How do you explain bargaining with something that doesn't exist in any manual? How do you admit that the rules you mocked were the only thing standing between life and oblivion? I handed in my resignation, the empty space on my chest where my badge used to be a constant reminder of what I'd given up. In the weeks that followed, I found myself changed. I walked the land with a new humility, listening to the wind, watching the shadows. I understood now why the locals locked their doors on the new moon, why they whispered warnings to their children. The rules weren't superstition. They were survival, hard-won wisdom passed down through generations. I'd come to West Texas certain that everything could be explained, that the world was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Now I know better. Some mysteries aren't meant to be unraveled. Some debts can never be paid in full. I'd saved my nephew, but lost a part of myself to the desert. And as the next new moon approached, I found myself watching the horizon, listening for voices in the wind, and hoping I'd never have to choose again. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself driving the old county roads, headlights sweeping over empty fields, the sky above as black as the inside of a coffin. I think about the rules, about the faces of the missing, about the things I saw and the things I can't explain. The new moon comes and goes, and with it, the uneasy silence that settles over the land. I know now that the desert keeps its own kind of time, its own kind of memory. Every debt is tallied, every promise remembered. I've learned that knowledge has a price. The more you see, the more you owe. I carry that weight with me, a constant reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The badge I gave up was just a symbol. What I lost was certainty, the belief that the world was safe, that monsters only lived in stories. Eli is safe, but he doesn't talk about that night. Sometimes I catch him staring at the horizon, flinching at shadows, listening for things only he can hear. My sister keeps the porch light burning all night now, and I can't blame her. The town moves on, but the land remembers. The new moon comes again in 29 days. I wonder who will be next, what the desert will demand, what rules will be broken. I wonder if I'll be strong enough to face it again, or if the next time, the desert will finally collect what it's owed. Out here, every new moon is a question, and the only answer is what you're willing to risk to survive.